My husband said I was insecure until I caught his ex taking my place in my own home. My front door always stuck when it rained, and that night I had to shoulder it open with a grocery bag digging into my wrist and my work shoes half soaked through. I remember that stupid detail because I was already annoyed before I even saw them. My feet hurt. My lower back hurt. My phone battery was dying. And all I wanted was a shower and maybe 10 minutes of quiet before I had to think about the next shift. Instead, I pushed my way into the apartment and found my husband on the couch under our faded gray blanket with his childhood friend tucked in close enough that I had to stop and make sure I was seeing it right. They were laughing at something on his phone. Not regular laughing either. That soft, private kind that makes you feel like you walked into a room you were never supposed to enter. He looked up first. "Hey," he said, like I had just come back from checking the mail. She turned and smiled at me with that small, closed-mouth smile she used when she wanted to look harmless. Long day? That question. God. That question almost sent me over the edge more than the blanket did. I set the groceries on the counter a little harder than necessary and said, "Why is it after midnight? And why are you two still like this in my living room?" Notice I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't do the dramatic wife thing people love to imagine when they want to make a woman sound unstable. I asked a straight question in a normal tone, and somehow that still made me the problem. He rolled his eyes so fast I could have laughed if I wasn't busy trying not to cry from pure exhaustion. "Nadine, seriously? We were watching videos." His friend pulled the blanket off her lap, but not all the way, which somehow made it worse. "You always jump to the weirdest conclusions. Always." According to both of them, I had this rich fantasy life where normal married boundaries were apparently my own personal invention. Messages at 1 in the morning? Innocent. Her dropping by without asking? Innocent. Him canceling plans with me because she was having a hard day? Also innocent. Everything was innocent except my reaction to it. I started unloading groceries because if I looked at them too long, I was going to say something ugly. And once I start saying ugly things, I get very creative. Not a strength, just a fact. Milk in the fridge, frozen dinners in the freezer, bread on the counter. He kept talking behind me in that irritated, patient voice people use when they want credit for not yelling first. "You know she's been around forever," he said. "I'm not going to apologize because you're insecure." There it was. Insecure. His favorite word. Not tired, not disrespected, not uncomfortable. Insecure. A neat little label you can slap on a woman when you want to avoid answering what she's actually saying. His friend sighed like she was the mature one in the room and said, "Maybe if you trusted your husband, you'd sleep better." I turned around so slowly I surprised myself. Maybe if my husband acted like one, I would. For half a second, nobody spoke. He looked embarrassed, which almost scared me more than anger would have. Then he stood up, threw the blanket aside, and said I was making the apartment miserable again. Again. As if misery was some hobby of mine, like scrapbooking. I wanted to say 100 things. I wanted to ask why she was always here when I came home late. I wanted to ask why he smiled at her in ways he hadn't smiled at me in months. I wanted to ask why our marriage kept needing me to be the reasonable one while their little friendship got to do whatever it wanted. But my throat was tight, and I knew the second I sounded emotional, he'd point at that too. So I did what I had been doing for months. I swallowed it. I took my shower. I changed into an old shirt. I got into bed alone because she finally left 20 minutes later and he stayed in the living room long enough to make it clear he was annoyed with me. Not the situation. The mattress felt cold on his side. The ceiling had a water stain that looked like a crooked bird. I stared at it and replayed the scene until I started doing the thing I hated most, questioning my own eyes. Maybe the blanket meant nothing. Maybe she really was just too comfortable. Maybe I had become one of those women who saw danger everywhere because she was tired and broke and one tiny push away from losing it in the cereal aisle. The next morning, he kissed my forehead before work, like nothing had happened. "Don't be weird today," he said. And the humiliating part? I almost let that work on me. At work, I spent 10 hours on my feet answering questions from impatient contractors and helping customers load heavy boxes into carts while my mind kept looping back to his face, her smile, the blanket, the way he said insecure like it was my legal name. A woman from the paint desk asked if I was okay because I dropped a stack of invoices twice. I told her I hadn't slept, which was true, just not the whole truth. By the time my shift ended, I had almost convinced myself I needed to go home, apologize for my tone, and restore peace like some overworked emotional janitor. That's the kind of marriage I had by then. One where my hurt became a mess I was expected to clean up. When I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a photo from him. Dinner on our table, candles lit, his caption saying, "Truce?" Looking back, that should have told me everything. He could stage tenderness in 10 seconds flat. Real accountability, though? That man would rather chew glass. I went home that night because of course I did. The mortgage payment was due in a week, both our names were on the condo, and real life doesn't care that your marriage feels haunted. He had made pasta, lit 2 candles we had gotten from a discount store, and put on the soft version of himself that used to make me melt and now mostly made me suspicious. He pulled my chair out for me. I almost laughed. This was a man who normally called from the couch if he wanted a fork. "Can we not do this?" he said once we sat down. I hate when things feel tense. That sentence right there sums up half our relationship. Not, "I'm sorry I hurt you." Not, "I understand why you were upset." Just a complaint about the atmosphere. He always treated conflict like weather. Unpleasant, inconvenient, nobody's fault. I said, "Then stop creating it." He gave me that wounded look he used whenever I refused to play nice on command. I made dinner. "Yes. You also let another woman curl up under our blanket after midnight?" "She's not another woman. She's her." Even now that line irritates me. As if there are women, and then there is the special exception who gets to ignore every boundary because she has history. She had history, all right. She had a permanent backstage pass to my marriage. For a few days, he turned sweet. Not actually thoughtful. Sweet in a controlled, strategic way. He brought me coffee. He texted me during work asking if I'd eaten. He rubbed my shoulders while I cooked and told me I was stressed. Stressed was his favorite close cousin to insecure. It sounds almost caring if you don't listen too hard. Meanwhile, his behavior somehow got even more entitled. He wanted full dinners after my late shifts because he was starving. He wanted his work shirts washed a certain way. He wanted me in bed early because he slept better when I was there. I'd get home after standing on concrete all day, and somehow I was still expected to perform comfort like a service package included in the lease. And then, because humiliation apparently likes to diversify, he started posting me. Not me as a person. Me as content. My hands plating food. My back at the stove. My coffee mug next to his on the counter. Captions about home and peace and how lucky he was. People online ate it up. Couple goals. "She takes such good care of you." His friend would comment almost immediately every time. Little inside joke remarks. Things like, "Some people really do live well." Or, "Must be nice to have this kind of treatment." Too intimate. Too aware of the rhythms of our house. Like she wasn't watching from outside. Like she was in it with us. One afternoon at work, I showed a coworker one of those comments and asked if it was weird. I expected immediate outrage. I got a shrug. "I mean," she said, "if they've known each other forever, maybe that's just how they are. Maybe you're reading into it because you don't like her." I hated how much that got to me, because she wasn't wrong about one part. I did not like her. I hadn't liked her in a long time. And I felt guilty about it because women are supposed to perform generosity even when their instincts are screaming. I kept telling myself mature people don't get threatened by old friends. Mature people trust. Mature people don't go scrolling through old posts at midnight trying to figure out whether a comment from 8 months ago sounded flirty. Spoiler, I did exactly that. And buried in years of pictures and old captions and blurry group photos from before I came along, I found enough to make my stomach drop. There were photos of them at prom, photos of them at some cheap fair, him with his arm around her waist, photos where he looked younger but exactly the same in one important way, completely certain that she adored him. There was no public label on any of it, but you don't need a signed affidavit when 2 teenagers are practically draped over each other. He had once told me they briefly liked each other in high school. Briefly liked each other. That man could sanitize a bomb threat into a scheduling conflict. I asked him about it that night while he was folding laundry badly. "Why did you lie about your history with her?" He didn't even look rattled at first. "I didn't lie. You told me it was basically nothing." "It was nothing. We were kids. Kids who dated." He tossed a shirt onto the bed. "You're doing the thing again." The thing. Another one of his favorites. No specifics. Just a vague little accusation that turned my concern into a pattern, my pattern into a flaw, and my flaw into the real issue. Efficient, honestly. I said, "Why am I finding this out from old pictures instead of from you?" He finally looked up. "Because I knew you'd act exactly like this." I cannot explain how crazy that sentence made me feel. He hid information because he predicted I'd be upset about hidden information. Circular reasoning from hell. Then he pulled out the old line he used when he felt cornered. "You changed after we got married." Changed into what? A woman who noticed things? A woman who expected not to be treated like an annoying obstacle in her own home? Probably. A few nights later, he didn't come home at all. At 10, he texted that he was out with friends. At midnight, he said he was still out. At 2 in the morning, he stopped answering. I sat on the couch with every lamp on because the apartment felt too large and too quiet. And I hated myself for checking the window every time headlights crossed the blinds. I told myself I wouldn't call again. Then I called again. Then I called once more from the kitchen, because for some reason being in a different room made me feel less pathetic. It did not. He walked in after 7 the next morning, smelling like stale beer and mint gum. The worst part wasn't even the smell. It was the casualness. He came in rubbing his jaw like he had stayed up gaming at a friend's place, not vanished for an entire night while married. I didn't want to wake you, he said. That was his excuse. He had slept somewhere else with his childhood friend after drinking, but apparently he deserved points for not being noisy on the way in. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because I had reached that terrifying stage where your body starts picking random reactions because the normal ones are overloaded. Where did you sleep? At her apartment. On the couch. He said it fast, like ripping a bandage off. I wish I could tell you I instantly packed a bag and found my dignity. I didn't. First, I did the sadder thing. I asked, "Did anything happen?" And he looked offended. Offended. No. Not apologetic. Not ashamed. Offended that I would think spending the night at another woman's apartment after months of weirdness might require explanation. That was the morning something in me stopped trying to make him comfortable. I didn't throw him out that morning. I should probably admit that early, before anybody starts picturing me as some clean, decisive heroine who always says the perfect thing in the perfect moment. What I actually did was stand there in an old shirt with yesterday's mascara under my eyes and start listing every small humiliation I had swallowed over the last year until the list got so long even I was embarrassed by it. I reminded him about the late-night calls, the surprise visits, the holidays where she somehow ended up in our plans, the way he defended her faster than he had ever defended me, the way he made me feel dramatic for reacting to things most married people would side-eye on sight. I talked and kept talking because once I started, I couldn't stop. Everything I had been trying to sound cool about came out hot. The argument got loud enough that our neighbor across the hall opened his door and pretended to check the mail in a shirt and boxers. Another door cracked open farther down. My husband lowered his voice then, not because he cared about hurting me, but because he hated being seen looking bad. That was one of the first really useful things I learned about him. Shame only mattered when it was public. "You're trying to embarrass me," he said through clenched teeth. "I'm trying to understand why my husband thinks sleeping at another woman's apartment should be normal. Because nothing happened. It doesn't matter. Do you hear yourself? It doesn't matter if you crossed one line when you've been dancing on all the others for months." He hated that sentence. I know he did because his face changed. The soft, manipulative calm snapped. And for a second, I saw the version of him that came out only when I cornered him too directly. He got colder, not louder. "You're impossible when you get like this," he said. "I work all day and come home to interrogation. I can't breathe in this apartment." That one almost got me. Not because it was true, because it was built from just enough truth to land. I did ask questions. I was tense. I had become watchful and suspicious and brittle, but he loved acting like my reaction existed in a vacuum, like it wasn't attached to a single thing he had done. He moved toward me and tried the reset switch. Arms half open, voice low, saying we were both tired, saying we were spiraling, saying if I would calm down he would put distance between himself and his friend, because clearly I needed reassurance. Needed reassurance. As if this was a favor, he was offering a nervous child. That was the first time I left in the middle of the night. I threw random clothes in a duffel bag, grabbed my keys, and drove without thinking. The roads were shiny from earlier rain. Every gas station looked overly bright and vaguely depressing. I ended up at a roadside motel outside the city where the desk clerk didn't even glance up much when I paid. The bedspread had that scratchy feel cheap places all seem to share. But when I shut the door and realized nobody could walk in and tell me I was crazy, I almost cried from relief. I stayed there until noon, staring at daytime television and eating crackers from a vending machine because I hadn't packed anything useful. He called 15 times. Then he switched to texts. First worried, then annoyed, then sweet, then wounded. He was a one-man rotating display of emotional strategy. "Come home so we can talk." This is childish. "I'm sorry you got upset. I miss you. You're making this bigger than it is. I bought you something." That last text should tell you exactly who he was. Not accountable. Transactional. Every problem had a prop. He picked me up from the motel because I had made the smart financial choice of using almost all my gas in a dramatic escape, and did not, in fact, want to add roadside helplessness to the list of my current dignities. The ride back was quiet. He kept reaching for my hand, and I kept moving it to fix imaginary things in my bag. A few days later, he asked me to go shopping with him. "Just us," he said, in the tone people use when they want credit for basic exclusivity. He said he wanted to buy me something nice because we hadn't done anything together in forever. I should have said no. Instead, I went because part of me still wanted evidence that he could choose me cleanly, without any weirdness attached. At the clothing store, I took a dress into the fitting room while he sat outside. When I came out, smoothing the fabric over my hips and already feeling a little exposed because changing room mirrors are basically acts of violence, he was on video call with her. Not hiding it. Not caught. Just openly showing me off. "She hates it," he was saying, laughing. "Tell her it looks good." His phone was angled toward me. Her face filled the screen with that amused little smile like this was all one big game, and I was the uptight piece refusing to play correctly. Something in my chest just went dead calm. I went back into the fitting room, took the dress off, put my own clothes back on with careful hands, came out, set the dress over his arm, and walked straight toward the exit. He chased me into the parking lot. "What is wrong with you now?" Now. Like there was a rotation schedule for my emotional inconveniences. "What's wrong with me?" I said. "Is that I can't even try on a dress without your little audience?" She was helping. No, she was participating. He started in with the oversensitive routine again, but I had already reached my car. I got inside, locked the doors, and drove away, while he stood there looking baffled that his usual methods were suddenly bouncing off. That night, I did something petty. I'm not proud of it. But I'm also not going to pretend I was above pettiness by then. I went out with people from work. Just drinks after shift, nothing scandalous. I left my phone face down in my bag while he called and called. I let him sit in uncertainty for once. When I came home, a little tipsy and completely over everyone, he opened the door before I could even get my key in. "Where were you?" The speed of that question almost made me laugh in his face. After months of me wondering where he was, with whom, for how long, and why my discomfort never counted, he finally looked rattled by not having immediate access to me. "Out," I said. "With who?" "People." He hated my vagueness because it denied him material to argue with. He followed me into the kitchen talking fast, asking if I had any idea what he'd been imagining, saying he'd been worried sick. Worry looked weird on him. It had jealousy mixed in, possession too. Not tenderness. More like panic that the furniture had developed free will. The next morning he swung hard in the other direction. He brought me coffee in bed. He sent me messages about how beautiful I was. He offered to pick up dinner. It all felt less like love and more like a hostage negotiator trying new tactics. At work, the man from commercial who handled vendor accounts asked if I was okay while we were both stuck near the loading area waiting on a delayed shipment. He had noticed the dark circles, the distracted mistakes, the fact that I kept checking my phone and then getting irritated every time it lit up. I told him I was tired. He said, "You don't have to tell me anything, but tired and miserable don't look the same." That sentence stayed with me because it was careful. No push, no fake intimacy. Just an observation and a door left open. A few days later, my car wouldn't start after my shift. He was the last person still in the back lot besides me. He asked if I wanted a ride. I almost said no on reflex because women are trained to think saying yes to anything means you owe an explanation later. But it was cold, my battery was dead, and he looked about as threatening as an exhausted accountant. We exchanged numbers for practical reasons. That's how it started. Not romance, not sparks, practicality, a ride to the apartment, a recommendation for a cheap mechanic, a few messages about whether my car had survived. The weird thing was how startling basic kindness felt by then. He asked before assuming. He listened without trying to reshape what I said. When I apologized for venting too much one night over text, he wrote back, "You don't sound crazy. You sound tired of being treated like your discomfort is an inconvenience." I stared at that message way too long, because once somebody names the thing clearly, it gets harder to keep living inside the blurry version. By the time he suggested a dinner date to reset us, I was already emotionally gone in ways I hadn't admitted out loud. Still, I said yes because I was curious what version of him would show up. The remorseful husband, the charming one, the irritated one pretending not to be irritated. There were so many versions by then it felt like I was living with an improv group. He booked a table at a restaurant downtown that thought dim lighting could fix mediocre food. I put on a black top, jeans, earrings I hadn't worn in months, and enough concealer to look like I slept. He watched me getting ready with this pleased expression, like me putting effort into my face was somehow proof we were okay. "You look good," he said. "Thanks." He tried to kiss me before we left. I turned my head just enough that he got my cheek. Petty? Maybe. Earned? Also, maybe. At the restaurant, he was overdoing normalcy, asking about my day, telling dumb stories from work, reaching for my hand across the table every few minutes. I remember thinking, this is what makes manipulation so effective. It doesn't have to be awful every minute. It just has to keep offering enough hope to keep you in your seat. Then 20 minutes in, she walked in. Not walked by, not called. Walked in and straight to our table with a surprised face so fake I almost respected the nerve. "Oh my God," she said. "What are the odds?" The odds apparently were excellent, because she was wearing the dress he had bought for me a week before. Same color, same cut, same little gold buttons on the sleeve. My brain took a second to process it, and when it did, the room seemed to tilt in that weird slow-motion way people describe after accidents. I looked at him. He looked guilty for exactly half a second before rearranging his face. "She was nearby," he said. Nearby. Of course she was. Why wouldn't she be? Maybe she lived in the air vents by then. I asked the question before I had time to edit it into something more polite. "Are you in love with my husband?" The silence after that was beautiful. Instant. Heavy. Pure. Even the server hovering behind her with a water glass froze like she had wandered into live theater. His friend let out this little laugh and said, "Wow, you really went there. You're wearing the dress he bought me. He gave it to me because you didn't want it." That sentence lit me up so fast I could feel it in my ears. He actually winced because he knew exactly how bad that sounded. I turned to him. "You gave her the dress?" It was just a dress. That was his real skill, I think, not lying, minimizing, turning obvious disrespect into something too small to justify your reaction. If you react, you're dramatic. If you don't, the disrespect grows legs and moves in. I said, "And the photos I found, the ones from high school, were those just nothing too?" His friend's expression changed then. Tiny, quick, enough. She hadn't known I knew. He said, "We dated when we were kids. It doesn't matter." "No," I said. "What matters is that you hid it and then kept acting like I was sick in the head for noticing your ex is in my marriage more than I am." She crossed her arms and gave me this cold, superior look that made her seem older than all of us. Maybe if you were secure in your relationship, none of this would feel threatening. I should have stayed calm. I didn't. I said, "Secure? You show up in the middle of our dinner in my dress and you want to talk to me about security?" He muttered my name in that warning tone, which only made me angrier. He loved that tone. Husband as school principal. So I did something reckless and incredibly satisfying. I texted the man from work. "Can you come by this restaurant for 10 minutes? I need a favor, and yes, this is ridiculous." Even sending it made me feel insane. He didn't answer right away, and part of me felt relief because maybe that meant I could still back out and preserve the last scraps of my dignity. Then he wrote back, "I'm nearby. Are you okay?" "No," I typed. "But can you come anyway?" He arrived 20 minutes later looking confused, careful, and maybe a little worried I had joined a cult. My husband's entire body changed when he saw another man approaching the table. Amazing how boundaries suddenly became crystal clear when applied to him. "This is from work," I said to nobody in particular. The man from work gave the kind of polite nod people use when they realize they have stepped into emotional quicksand and don't want to make any sudden movements. "You texted me." My husband stood up. "Why is he here?" I could have kissed the hypocrisy right in the mouth. "Oh, because apparently we're all doing dinner now," I said. I thought that was the theme. His friend glared at me like I had broken some sacred social rule. Which I had, I guess. The sacred rule where other women are allowed to intrude on your marriage as long as you stay gracious about it. The man from work stayed maybe 15 minutes. He was so obviously trying not to intensify anything that it actually made the whole thing hit harder. He didn't touch me, didn't perform, didn't lean in too close. He sat, answered a few awkward questions, drank water, and looked like he would rather be audited than remain at that table. But the contrast did all the work for me. One man understood restraint without being taught. The other had spent months calling me controlling for wanting any at all. When the check came, my husband grabbed it too fast. Control again. Always. Outside the restaurant, his friend suggested the four of us go somewhere else, which was so absurd I almost wondered if she had lost all contact with reality or if she just counted on everyone else being too stunned to challenge her. My husband looked at me like he expected me to smooth it over, nod politely, keep the peace. Instead, I asked the man from work if he wanted coffee. He blinked. Right now? Yeah, I said. Right now. My husband stepped closer. You're seriously doing this? I looked straight at him and said, I don't want to interrupt your night. Then I left. The coffee shop was still open because in every American city there is always one place full of people pretending caffeine at 9:30 is a personality. We sat near the window, both of us kind of stunned. I laughed first. That shaky, almost hysterical laugh you do when your body doesn't know whether to cry, scream, or order a pastry. I'm sorry, I said. You did not deserve any of that. He stirred his coffee for a second. Do you want me to tell you that looked normal? No? Okay. It didn't. I posted a picture of the coffee cup later on a social media app. Nothing suggestive. No caption. Just the table, the cup, the edge of a menu. My husband messaged within minutes. What the hell is this? Funny how one bland photo caused more outrage than an actual woman wearing my dress to my dinner. My phone kept buzzing all night. Angry messages, hurt messages, accusations about respect and appearances and how I was humiliating him. The man had practically run a shared marriage beta program out of our apartment, and now he wanted to discuss humiliation. At some point, the man from work texted, I'm home. You don't need to answer. But please don't let anybody convince you tonight was your fault. That message almost undid me more than the fight did, because kindness at the wrong time can feel like grief. It shows you what you were missing while you were busy surviving. When I got home, my husband was waiting in the kitchen with all the lights on. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked, Are you sleeping with him? And that's when something ugly and clear finally took shape inside me. Not heartbreak, not even jealousy anymore. Contempt. He asked if I was sleeping with him, and I remember staring at my husband across the kitchen island thinking, you really built an entire alternate universe in your head where you get to do whatever you want, and I still owe you purity. It would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. No, I said. But the fact that that's where your mind went is interesting. He hated when I got quiet. Anger he knew how to manage. Tears he could weaponize. Silence made him sloppy. You made me look stupid tonight. I laughed right in his face that time. I couldn't help it. Tonight? Just tonight? He started pacing, talking faster, saying that whatever weird thing existed between him and his friend had never crossed a line, but me bringing another man into it had changed things. Changed things. Like there was some sacred honor code I had violated in a game he had been cheating at for months. So let me get this straight, I said. Your ex can show up in my dress to our dinner, and that's complicated. I drink coffee with a coworker once, and suddenly I'm disrespecting the marriage. She's not my ex in the way you're making it sound. What way am I making it sound? You know what I mean. I did know what he meant. And that was the problem. He wanted all the privileges of emotional intimacy with her, and all the moral protection of pretending she was basically family. Men like that love categories that blur only in the direction that benefits them. We argued until after midnight. Not about facts. Facts were useless by then. About framing, tone, intentions, appearances. He kept trying to drag the conversation away from what he did and back toward how I reacted to it. Every time I pulled it back, he got meaner. Finally, he said, maybe I turned to her because you've been miserable for months. There it was. The little knife. My fault after all. I said, then you should have left. Not built a side relationship and called me paranoid. He slept on the couch that night, because I told him if he came into the bedroom, I would lose whatever tiny grip on myself I still had. I barely slept anyway. I kept replaying everything, but this time not like a woman trying to prove herself wrong, like a woman auditing damage. The next few weeks were ugly in smaller, quieter ways. He started deleting old couple photos from his profiles, not all at once, just enough to make me notice. Then he'd text me something soft, like he missed how we used to laugh. He sent flowers to my job one afternoon with a card that said, "We're stronger than this." Everybody in the break area made those noises people make when they think they're witnessing romance. I wanted to throw the arrangement into traffic. The man from work did not make a big deal out of any of it. That mattered. He asked if I wanted company during lunch once. Another time, he sent me the name of a mechanic because my car was making a noise like a haunted shopping cart. He never pushed me to tell the full story, but when I did talk, he listened like listening was not some rare heroic service. Just a thing decent adults do. One evening, we sat in his car outside my apartment complex because I wasn't ready to go inside yet. The sky was that weird blue-gray color right before full dark. People were walking dogs. Somebody somewhere was grilling. Very ordinary. That almost made it easier to tell the truth. I think the worst part, I said, is that he made me feel crazy slowly. Not in some dramatic movie way, just one little dismissal at a time. He nodded. That's usually how it happens. I kept asking myself if I was insecure, jealous, broken, mean, maybe all of the above. You can be jealous and still be right, he said. Those things aren't opposites. I sat there for a second because nobody had ever framed it that simply for me. In my marriage, if I felt jealous, that automatically invalidated everything else. Jealousy was treated like contamination. If it touched my reaction, the whole thing got thrown out. He looked over at me and added, "Also, for what it's worth, your husband clearly knows exactly what he's doing. He just likes pretending confusion." That sentence should be printed on a mug and handed to people in bad relationships. At home, my husband had moved into this awful phase where he watched everything. What time I came in, who texted, how long I was in the shower. He asked too casually whether I had lunch alone. He wanted to know why I needed overtime. He noticed if I changed my lipstick. He had spent months making a fool out of me in broad daylight, but the second I developed even the possibility of a separate emotional life, he became a full-time surveillance system. His friends started pulling away around then, which would have been satisfying if it hadn't also been pathetic. He began demanding more from her, more reassurance, more availability, more clarity, I suspect. He had always liked the triangle when I was the stable point holding down the practical part of his life. Once that stability wobbled, his little emotional playground got complicated. I heard them fighting once because she called while he was in the shower and his phone kept lighting up. When I finally picked it up and answered, she went silent for 2 full beats before saying, "Can he call me back?" "He's busy," I said. Her voice cooled immediately. "This isn't about you." That line actually made me smile. That's been the problem for a while. He came out of the bathroom dripping and grabbed the phone out of my hand like I had touched government secrets. They argued in the bedroom with the door mostly closed and voices low, but you can hear plenty through cheap apartment walls. Enough to know she was annoyed with his clinginess, and he was angry she had disappeared after all that talk about always being there for him. I sat on the couch and watched a home renovation show with the volume too low because I suddenly felt too tired for the front row seat I had spent months fighting for. The public collapse happened on a Thursday. Thursdays were always brutal at the store because deliveries backed up and everyone seemed to need something impossible 5 minutes before closing. I was in the front area helping a customer sort out an order issue when I heard my name and his voice from across the aisle. Not warm, not even neutral. Sharp. He had come to my job. I felt my stomach drop in that immediate body-before-brain way. He strode toward me like a man arriving to reclaim something. People noticed. Of course they noticed. You can always tell when a personal disaster enters a workplace because the air changes first. "Can we talk?" he asked, already too loud. "Not here." "Well, apparently anywhere else means your boyfriend gets invited." Somewhere to my left, a cashier froze with a scanner in her hand. I said his name quietly and told him to leave. That should have been the moment a decent person felt shame. Instead, he got more dramatic. He said I was humiliating our marriage, that I had become cruel, that I was letting some random coworker poison me against people who had loved me for years. Loved me. I wanted to hand him a dictionary and a mirror. The man from work appeared from the side aisle then, not charging in, not posturing, just present. My husband saw him and snapped. Not physically, verbally. He started pointing, asking if this was the guy, asking everyone around us if they could believe I was throwing away my marriage over one innocent friendship while acting like a victim. And maybe that was the final gift of his public scene. It was too much, too obvious, too ugly to explain away. I stood there in my work apron with customers pretending not to listen, and coworkers very much listening, and I said, as clearly as I have ever said anything in my life, I want a divorce. Everything stopped. Not dramatically, no music swelling, just one of those dead silent moments where the truth lands so hard the room has to catch up. He looked stunned, actually stunned. As if after all this, after all those months of calling me insecure and difficult and impossible, he still believed I would stay because staying had become part of my assigned role. I said it again. I want a divorce. And I want you out of my life enough that I can hear my own thoughts again. He opened his mouth like he had a script ready and forgot it mid-scene. Then he left, furious, humiliated, muttering that I would regret this. I shook for an hour after. The man from work asked if I wanted him to stay until close. I said yes, and that yes felt almost as important as the divorce word had. Not romantic, just honest. I needed support, and I stopped acting like needing it made me weak. That night, I moved my husband's clothes to the living room. Not all of them, just enough that the message couldn't be misunderstood. He stood in the doorway staring at the pile of his clothes like I had arranged a body. Bags by the wall, shoes lined up, work shirts folded badly because I was past the point of caring whether his collars creased. He looked at me, then at the living room, then back at me, cycling through disbelief so hard it almost seemed sincere. "You're not serious." "I've never been more serious." That was the beginning of the begging phase. First came the apology version. He sat on the edge of the couch with his elbows on his knees, saying he had messed up, saying he hadn't realized how bad it got, saying nothing physical had happened and that had to count for something. I told him emotional betrayal was still betrayal, disrespect was still disrespect, and I was too tired to grade his cheating on a curve. Then came the panic version. He said we had built a whole life together. He reminded me our names were both on bills, that the mortgage would be a mess, that divorce would drain us financially. All true, which annoyed me because he always saved practicality for the moments he needed leverage. He never brought up money when he was playing husband and ex with matching inside jokes on my couch. Then came the rage version. He called me cruel. He said I was abandoning him over miscommunication. He accused me of wanting an excuse to be with somebody else. It was almost comforting, honestly. At least rage was straightforward. I told him he could sleep on the couch until he figured out somewhere else to go. He said that was humiliating. I said, good. That whole week, people started emerging from the walls of our lives with opinions. Friends we hadn't heard from in months suddenly became relationship experts. A mutual acquaintance told me very solemnly that marriage takes endurance. I said, so does food poisoning. That doesn't mean you should keep eating what made you sick. She did not enjoy that. The wildest part was how many people wanted to discuss my tone, not his actions. My tone. Had I tried not sounding accusatory? Had I made enough room for him to explain? Was it possible he genuinely didn't understand how it looked? I started wanting to hand out brochures titled "Men Understand Plenty" when the consequences finally arrive. He kept messaging while sitting 10 feet away in the living room. That should tell you what living together had become. Whole essays from the couch. He alternated between memory and guilt. Remember our first road trip? Remember how we used to stay up laughing? Remember how we got through your mother's health scare together? Yes, I remembered. I also remembered him letting another woman occupy emotional space in my marriage until I was gaslit into apologizing for noticing. A week later, he went to his friend. I know because people tell you things when disaster becomes public enough. Also, because he wanted me to know. He left one evening after another fight about paperwork, and came back late smelling like her perfume, not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed when he brushed past me in the hall. I said, "How did that go?" He froze. "What?" Running to the backup plan. His face went flat. "You're disgusting." "No," I said. "I'm observant." Whatever fantasy he had about her probably died slowly, and then all at once. At first he stayed smug, like going there proved something. Maybe that he had options. Maybe that I wasn't special. Men in free fall reach for strange comforts. Then his mood changed. He started looking wrecked. Not guilty wrecked. Rejected wrecked. He walked around with his phone in his hand like it contained oxygen. He snapped when I asked practical questions about separating bills. He slammed drawers. Once I heard him say on the phone, "After everything, you're just going to disappear?" And I nearly laughed myself sick in the bedroom because "after everything" was exactly the phrase I had wanted to scream at him for months. A mutual friend sent me screenshots without me asking. That's another truth people don't say enough. When a messy relationship cracks open, spectators materialize immediately. In the messages, his friend was mocking him to somebody else. Not in a grand movie villain way. Worse. Casual. She called him needy. Said he loved being wanted more than he loved any actual person. Said I had been embarrassingly patient, which was somehow the meanest thing of all because she wasn't wrong. I stared at those screenshots with a feeling I still have trouble naming. Vindication, yes. Also grief. Because there it was in plain language. The whole dynamic had never been romantic destiny or some deep, unbreakable bond. It was ego, attention, access, convenience. She liked the power. He liked being worshipped. I was the one paying electric bills while they acted out adolescence with adult consequences. He came to my room 2 nights later holding his phone like evidence of a crime. She was using me. I looked up from the spreadsheet where I was trying to figure out whether I could carry the place alone for 2 more months and said, "That's not actually the headline here." He sat on the edge of the chair and talked for 20 straight minutes about betrayal, humiliation, how blind he had been, how cruel she turned out to be. I let him finish because I was genuinely curious whether self-awareness would appear at the end like a magician from a trapdoor. It did not. He never once said, "I did to you what she just did to me." He wanted comfort. Again. He wanted me to become the stable audience for his latest emotional injury, even though half of it was the natural consequence of treating our marriage like a waiting room while he entertained himself elsewhere. I told him, "I'm sorry your ego got hurt. I'm not the person for this conversation." He stared at me like I had failed some basic woman test. That weekend, his parents came over. If you've never been quietly blamed by your almost former in-laws in your own living room while your marriage collapses in real time, I don't recommend it. His mother entered already emotional, already armed with the kind of concern that is actually criticism in a cardigan. His father looked tired, genuinely tired, like a man who had spent years cleaning up after his son in small ways and was not enjoying the larger version. His mother said, "He's beside himself." I said, "He was very calm while I was beside myself." She winced at that because truth is rude when it arrives without nice packaging. We sat down. She told me marriage was hard. She told me men were sometimes oblivious, not malicious. She told me no relationship survives if both people keep score. That last one nearly took me out. Keep score. As if my issue was tally marks instead of sustained disrespect. So I stopped trying to sound nice. I told them about the couch under the blanket, the overnights, the dress, the dinner ambush, the way he used insecurity as a weapon, the way he made every boundary request sound like pathology. I told them I had spent months feeling like a difficult guest in my own life. I told them their son did not need another defender. He needed consequences. His mother cried. Not because she fully understood, because hearing it all in a row made it impossible to cling to the softer family version of him. His father stayed quiet most of the time, but at one point he rubbed his forehead and muttered. I asked him more than once what game he thought he was playing. That was the first moment I felt less crazy with them. Not forgiven, not embraced, but less crazy. His mother still tried one last move. A marriage can survive a lot if two people are willing. I looked at her and said, then maybe he should have thought of that before inviting a third person into it every day. Nobody had a comeback for that. After they left, he accused me of humiliating him in front of his parents. I said, your life has been one long campaign to avoid embarrassment while I carry the actual pain. I'm done participating. He slept at a friend's place that night. A male friend, for whatever that was worth. The apartment was so quiet, I sat on the floor in the hallway and cried harder from relief than sadness. A few weeks later, he moved most of his things out, not gracefully. There were arguments over furniture, kitchen appliances, who had paid for what, who deserved the television, whether he should keep the good vacuum because he had researched it. Divorce in normal life is often less like courtroom drama and more like two damaged people talking about lamp ownership while trying not to vomit from stress. The man from work started seeing me outside of crisis by then. Real dates, though I hated calling them that at first because it made me feel like I was cheating on a corpse. Coffee, walks. A cheap diner with pie that tasted nostalgic even though I had never been there before. He never rushed me. He also never pretended my situation wasn't messy. That mattered too. There's nothing more suspicious than someone acting like your half-finished divorce and emotional collapse are charming. One night in his car, I admitted, part of me still feels guilty for feeling okay around you. He said, feeling okay is not a crime. I laughed. You'd be amazed how many people are treating it like one. He shrugged. People like triangles as long as they understand their role. You stepped out of yours. And maybe that was the real turning point. Not the restaurant, not the public fight. Realizing I no longer wanted the role they had written for me. The actual divorce process was as unglamorous as every adult disaster worth taking seriously. Paperwork, consultations, bank statements. A lawyer with tired eyes explaining that simple cases only stay simple if both people act simple, which mine absolutely did not. My husband was not some criminal mastermind. That would have required discipline. He was something much more common and much more annoying. A man who thought consequences were negotiable if he seemed sad enough. At first, he signed some things quickly, like he was still trying to bluff his way through by acting cooperative. Then he slowed down, missed deadlines, forgot documents, challenged little details that had never mattered before, like who technically bought which chair or whether the kitchen table counted as shared property because his uncle had once helped us move it. It became obvious he wasn't fighting for the objects. He was fighting for drag, for friction, for ways to keep me in orbit. I started saving every message in a folder because he had entered the truly exhausting phase, alternating between pleading and attack. At 8 in the morning, he would text that nobody had ever understood him like I did. At noon, he would accuse me of emotionally cheating. By midnight, he'd be posting vague little victim lines on a social media app for everybody to interpret however they wanted. Mutual acquaintances sent screenshots like they were delivering weather updates. One post said, "Some people replace loyalty with attention the minute real life gets hard." Another said, "Funny how the ones who destroy a home always claim they were the ones suffering." My favorite was, "Not everyone who looks calm is innocent." That one made me laugh out loud in the grocery store because imagine spending months making your wife look unstable and then getting poetic about calm. Sir, be serious. I blocked him twice and unblocked him once because of paperwork. I regret the unblocking more than some decisions from my early 20s, and that is saying something. Financially, things got tight fast. He had been using more of his paycheck on dinners out, little gifts, gas, all the floating nonsense of a person who assumes somebody else is anchoring the practical side. Once we separated, it became painfully clear how much of our actual structure had been sitting on my shoulders. I cut subscriptions, cooked at home, sold a barely used chair online, and learned that one can in fact create 3 meals out of pantry odds and ends if fueled by equal parts spite and necessity. He, on the other hand, started unraveling financially almost immediately. I heard about it sideways. A friend mentioning he had asked to borrow money, a relative of his saying he was between places for a bit, one of his old buddies telling someone at a cookout that he never realized how expensive real life was because she handled that stuff. That quote made its way back to me, and I just sat there in a lawn chair holding a paper plate thinking, oh, now he discovered electricity costs money. Beautiful. Growth. The man from work, who by then felt strange to keep calling that. But I still did because I was weirdly superstitious about naming good things too soon, stayed patient while I lurched through all my moods. Some days I was light and almost myself. Other days I spiraled because a song came on in a pharmacy, or I found one of my husband's old notes in a drawer, or a stranger used the phrase, "trust your gut," and I wanted to scream because my gut had been right for months while I kept forcing it into silence. One Sunday afternoon, I was folding laundry at his place and just blurted out, "What if I'm one of those people who confuses kindness with safety because I've been starving?" He looked up from chopping vegetables and said, "Then we go slow enough that you can tell the difference." See, that is what steadiness sounds like. Not grand speeches, not promises, pacing. We did go slow. Maybe slower than either of us wanted. There was no dramatic sweep into a new life. There were awkward pauses, honest conversations, me getting triggered by stupid things and then feeling embarrassed about it. Once he put his phone face down on the table without thinking, and I instantly felt my whole body tense. He noticed, turned it over, unlocked it, and slid it toward me without 1 ounce of attitude. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. The point was that he had seen the reaction and answered it without making me feel shame for having one. My husband kept trying to get back in through side doors. He messaged my mother, who to her credit told him this was not her circus. He emailed me pretending he had important tax questions, and then used the second paragraph to talk about memories. He once left a bag of my favorite takeout at my door with a note that said, "Thought maybe you forgot I still know you." That note irritated me for hours because yes, he knew plenty about me. He just preferred using the information for control rather than care. The nastiest wave came after he realized I was actually spending time with someone else, not in a coffee as revenge way, but in a life moving forward way. He started telling people I had been emotionally involved before the marriage ended. I cannot prove how many believed him, but enough looked at me with that special mixture of curiosity and judgment that I could feel the narrative shifting around town. At a small get-together, one woman I barely knew asked, "So did things with your coworker start before or after?" Just blunt as a hammer over potato salad. I stared at her and said, "Did my husband's relationship with his ex start before or after he slept at her apartment and gave her my dress?" She nearly choked on her drink. I'm not proud of enjoying that, but apparently there are still small joys available during legal separation. What bothered me more was how hard people tried to simplify the timeline into innocence versus guilt. They wanted one clean villain and one clean victim because that's easier to gossip about. But real breakdowns are messier. I did emotionally detach before the marriage was officially dead. I did feel drawn toward someone else while paperwork was still happening. I did enjoy finally being seen. None of that changed what had been done to me. But it also didn't make me a saint. And honestly, I'm relieved it didn't. Saints are too passive for what I survived. My lawyer advised me more than once to respond less, document more, and let him exhaust himself. That was good legal advice and terrible emotional advice because I am, at baseline, a person who likes to answer nonsense with even better nonsense. Still, I followed it most of the time. The final mediation session was almost boring, which felt offensive after all the emotional bloodshed. We sat in separate rooms, numbers got adjusted, terms got clarified. He objected to the timeline for buying out my share of the condo, then backed down. He acted wounded about splitting a few household items, then suddenly lost interest. At one point, he asked through his lawyer if we could have one private conversation for closure. I said no. So fast, my own attorney looked impressed. Afterward, I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel and waited for the cinematic wave of freedom people always promise. What I felt instead was exhaustion, then hunger. So I got fries from a drive-thru and cried in the parking lot because apparently my nervous system had decided closure tasted like salt and cheap ketchup. That evening, I told the man from work it was done. He asked if I wanted him to come over. I said, yes, but I don't want to talk about paperwork for one more second. So he came over with groceries, cooked while I sat on the counter, and let me be strangely quiet without filling every silence. At one point, he asked, "Are you sad?" I thought about it. Not the way people probably expect. It's more like, I'm grieving how long I kept trying to force reality into a shape that wouldn't humiliate me. He nodded. That sounds like grief to me. Maybe. Or maybe it was just the headache after a very long lie finally breaks. A few months later, I saw him by accident at a home goods store on the edge of town. Not a dramatic place. Not some symbolic location. Just fluorescent lights, discounted towels, and me debating whether I really needed new storage containers. He was near the checkout holding 2 pillows and looking thinner, older, like life had finally started charging him full price. He saw me at the same time. For one weird second, we just stood there with all that history between us and no useful script left. "Hey," he said. He sounded careful, almost gentle, and I hated that part of me still recognized the old tone immediately. Muscle memory is rude like that. "Hey." He glanced at my cart, then at the man beside me. The one I no longer thought of as the man from work. Not privately anyway, but whose name still feels too intimate to hand over here. He had his hand resting lightly on the cart handle, not possessive, not performative, just there. Normal. Steady. My ex looked at him, then back at me. "You look good." I almost said, "You should have tried that sentence before detonating our marriage." Instead, I just said, "Thanks." There was this pause where I could feel him trying to decide which version of himself to be. Bitter. Charming. Regretful. He settled on something halfway to sincere and said, "I know I made a mess of things." That was probably the closest I was ever going to get to a real admission. Not enough, but realer than what came before. I nodded once. "Yeah, you did." He looked like he wanted more. Maybe absolution. Maybe an invitation to talk. Maybe just proof that I still carried him around as some active ache. The strange relief was realizing I didn't. Not in the old way. He wasn't this giant weather system over my life anymore. He was just a man who had made a series of selfish choices and then been shocked those choices had a bill attached. He said, "I hope you're happy." And because I was finally free enough to be honest without being cruel, I answered, "I'm peaceful." That mattered more. Something changed in his face then. Not dramatic heartbreak. Recognition, maybe, of what he had actually cost me. Not just a marriage. Peace. We left first. Out in the parking lot, the late afternoon sun was too bright, and I stood by the car longer than necessary, breathing like I had just come out of a building with bad air. The man beside me asked if I was okay. I said, "Yeah, I think I actually am." Not healed in some glossy, inspirational way. Not above bitterness, not magically wiser. I still had trust issues. I still checked for hidden meaning sometimes. I still had nights where I replayed old scenes and got angry all over again at the version of me who kept apologizing for being right. But I also had a quieter apartment, cleaner thoughts, and a life that no longer required me to doubt my own eyes just to keep somebody else comfortable. That turned out to be enough. More than enough, actually.